welcome to the first Sunday without NFL football, PFF Forecast. So it's going to be a little bit of a different vibe. We've got Brad and Arjun here, and we are going to talk a little bit about free agency, the draft, and what we bet when there are no NFL games. That will include, as promised, some XFL talk. I'm going to try and keep it to a minimum, but I've heard rumor that we're still making plays here. So it's going to be a good podcast. Let's rock. Recording this podcast, it's 3:54 p.m. Pacific time. We're about 36 minutes away from the NBA All-Star Draft. I can't wait to watch this because I think it's going to be such a joke. The first part of this, which is hilarious, is they refuse to let someone get drafted last. So they're picking reserves like beforehand. And then before the game starts, they're going to pick the starters like out there on the court. I'm guessing is my assumption. Or I don't know if you guys are following this at all, but I'm concerned. I'm confused. Not concerned is the wrong word. I'm confused. Are they going to go and like split up the locker rooms after? Because they're already in the locker rooms. They have like East and West. Like, how does that work? I'm so interested in this.
It's taking things to an extreme to avoid hurting a millionaire's feelings, who's already an all-star to begin with. But no, I think my understanding is they're still drafting the teams in the normal fashion for the starters. Like you said, it's just before that they're figuring out the backups. But yeah, just an all-time unnecessary move, just to avoid that the kid getting picked last in gym class scenario.
Sorry, you go, Judge.
Are they going to split up the locker rooms though? Do you see what I'm saying? Like, they've already recorded all this footage. They've got LeBron walking into the West locker room, dapping everybody up, gave Lauri Markkanen a big hug like they've been brothers forever. Classic. He was reading some sort of book on his way in as well. Like, what happens after the draft? They just go, okay, go get your shit and move it to a different locker room.
I guess so.
Yeah, it's a weird one. I don't really understand. I mean, these players, like, they already understand it's a business and like the real world. I don't know why like an all-star weekend would be any different than like if they got traded like during the middle of the season. So I'm not too sure why, they had to go to this extreme to go through the game.
And the most important reality is Luka Doncic had the quote of the week when they said, "What's your favorite part about All-Star Weekend?" He said, "Getting on the flight to Mexico after the game," which is how every single one of them feel. So.
Yeah, exactly. Apparently, Dallas Maverick fans are freaking out because I think he's going to gain like a bunch of weight here in Mexico, which could happen. Could happen. Do you guys have any bets we're going to talk about this at the end of the podcast? But because the All-Star game will probably start before people listen to this, do you guys have any bets that you're placing on this game?
So the total is at 324 right now. And the interesting thing for me is Giannis. I actually was at the Bulls-Bucks game on Thursday. Giannis got hurt and left. So I don't think he plays in this game. Mm-hmm. And for me, he's like an overkiller in these All-Star games because he can't really shoot. And he'll probably play some defense for, unlike anybody else. So I kind of like the over because I don't think Giannis is going to play all that much.
Yeah, that's not a bad call. Is Steph's not playing in this game though, right?
No.
Yeah, that hurts. Having a great shooter doesn't help. Okay, the first thing that we're going to tackle here today is a little free agency talk. So luckily we have the foremost wizard of free agency here with us, Brad Spielberger. If you have not gotten into free agency mode yet and you're trying to, go to pff.com, check out the free agency rankings. They have a salary cap projection, a contract projection for every player. And they are meticulously ranked and detailed by Brad himself. I can't, divulge any names, but I can tell you that NFL teams just have these up consistently and track them with a lot of faith. So if they're wildly off, Brad gets a phone call. So you probably want to check them out as well. Any news before we kind of get into our takes on this, Brad? Are there any sort of tidbits since the last time we talked around free agency that are worth noting?
Yeah, I think the interesting thing I've heard, so you mentioned also very important people. These are not static numbers. The free agency rankings page gets updated as I hear things. Like George said, if I get made fun of or yelled at or whatever angle it can come in. And I think it's also a process that's gotten better over the years of understanding, how to take in that information. But the main feedback that I've heard that I find interesting is, look, in years past, I do these rankings. The top 10 is full of all these names, and then all the guys get franchise tagged. The consistent theme has been a lot of those guys will not get tagged. They'll actually hit free agency. But also, a lot of more good players are going to be cap casualties, it seems like, across the NFL, which has some teams at bay kind of waiting to see who's going to hit the market. I know Keenan Allen, Arjun's guy Keenan Allen's been floated a bunch. I think some running backs, we saw Aaron Jones take a pay cut already. So does Joe Mixon, Dalvin Cook, Ezekiel Elliott, are they going to say yes to a pay cut? If not, are they going to get cut? There's still a lot going on, even, that's not even on the list yet. And the last piece, Derek Carr has a ton of suitors, kind of under the radar, a couple of visits already. One interesting thing I heard, more of a speculative thing, but if he goes to Washington, does that maybe make the Commanders not franchise tag Daron Payne? No guarantee that's the case. But if he goes there and they don't want to spend all that money, especially with an ownership change, that could make him, I think he'd be the number one free agent on the entire market.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Okay, Arjun, we'll start with you. What's the like free agency name / team connection that you feel best about right now?
Yeah. So, sorry, me and Brad, I think we're going to have an article out probably this week. So I've been working on doing some predictions on my end. And one that I really like, that's kind of like a random one, but I think the connection's there, the history's there. Marcus Davenport to the Kansas City Chiefs. Brett Veach loves to take shots on former first-round picks who didn't really pan out the way that they did, right? DeAndre Baker, I think he signed John Ross at one point. And I think Davenport falls into this category as well. The Chiefs pass rush has always been a need for them. And even though they kind of addressed it with Karlaftis last in the 2022 draft, I think they could still use another body. And, Frank Clark could be a cap casualty. We don't, know there. So they could replace him, and Davenport's cap charge in 2023 is going to be at least like $16 million less than what Clark's is going to be. So you get a much cheaper player with probably a little bit more upside. I don't know about in the playoffs, but at least in the regular season, you'll be more of a steady contributor. And Davenport has put together some good years. And obviously with the Saints cap situation, I don't really see a way for Davenport to go back to New Orleans. So I really like Davenport to the Chiefs, and I could see that happening.
Does that mean that Orlando Brown is looking for a new home?
I mean, personally, I think so. It's tricky because when you're coming off a Super Bowl win, the kind of mantra is like you're going to bring back all the guys that were part of that ride. But I think there is a chance that because of how good Mahomes is in the pocket, they don't really feel the need to pay Orlando Brown. And onto the fact that they've already paid Joe Thuney top of the market money. I don't know if they want to pay another offensive lineman top of the market money. And I think I've heard some talk that Thuney could move out to left tackle because he has played some spot starts there in the past. And if he does, $16 million for a pretty good left tackle is a steal. So I think that's a possibility. But yeah, I personally don't think Orlando Brown is coming back, and I don't think he had that great of a season to warrant him coming back. Even though I think his postseason stats were pretty good, I think his regular season stats were not as great to warrant a $20 million plus deal.
Yeah, that I was looking through my prep for this, just to full transparency, was reading Brad's analysis and looking at his rankings. And one thing that stuck out to me was exactly what you said, Brad. There's a lot of guys on this list who you go, they're not going back to that team again. Like you look at Levante David, Jamel Dean, it's like, well, they ain't going back to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. There's no reason for them to go back there. Daron Payne was another good example, but Orlando Brown sticks out to me. If there's anything that we've learned about the Kansas City Chiefs, it's that it is Mahomes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10 in terms of what matters for that team. And at 11 is just don't have a catastrophically bad offensive line. I mean, that is what we have learned this year, right? It doesn't matter if they have Tyreek Hill. It doesn't matter if they replace him with freaking Marquez Valdez-Scantling and Kadarius Toney. And we all went into that Super Bowl going, oh man, they've got some weaknesses on the outside, Orlando Brown being one of those guys. And it just really didn't matter because they're average. And why would you pay Orlando Brown buco bucks when he's just, pretty average? The other thing that I think is useful about the free agency rankings, by the way, is you can see how the players have graded and what their WAR has been over the last 3 seasons. Orlando Brown has been supremely average for the last 3 seasons. He's been 75.4, 75.4 each of the last 2 seasons in his PFF grade. And that puts him outside the top 10, really borderline like 15 in terms of tackles. So why you would pay him, 20 plus million a year, it doesn't make sense to me. Here's my prediction though. It is Jimmy G to the Jets. And here is the reason that I love this. They already invested that second overall pick in Zach Wilson. I think there's a little bit of them that goes, kind of hope that something clicks and something happens and like he figures it out. But here's the other thing. If they don't, okay, they have all this talent. Why go in on a mediocre quarterback? Why not maybe stock up to be able to make a big move for a quarterback the next season, right? Try and get up in the draft or something like that. And so I think Jimmy G fits that bill where you have a little bit of you that thinks, man, Jimmy G's taken a team with a ton of talent to the Super Bowl. We have similar staff here, like, let's go for it. And then the other part is we're in the AFC. We're not winning a Super Bowl with Derek freaking Carr. So we're either going to have to, hope that Jimmy G turns into a stud or go draft another quarterback. So I like that as a play for the Jets.
Yep. So, Arjun, you mentioned the Chiefs and their, cap flexibility. Frank Clark, another good example of a potential cap casualty, has a $20.5 million salary. The Chiefs are not paying that. And I totally agree on the Orlando Brown thoughts that he might get franchise tag, but why would you pay him top of market when he was bad against the Bengals? Frankly, he's good when the sod is you can't plant your foot as a pass rusher. That's when he excels. But I'm going back to the exact same well you mentioned with another often injured New Orleans Saints player. And I also just wanted to explain this situation and why he's on our free agent board. And that is wide receiver Michael Thomas, also to the Kansas City Chiefs. And I'll tell you this, he's not, yeah. There are some legitimate off-field concerns with Michael Thomas, nothing like legal or anything like that, but some locker room stuff. He's firing some tweets off that he then deletes a couple minutes later. Which I think he honestly has a fair gripe with the medical staff in New Orleans, but whole separate thing. But yeah, that's happened like multiple times in the last 2 weeks. But I will tell you this. First of all, who brings in players like that more than the Kansas City Chiefs? Nobody. And secondly, why he's on there. Look, yes, he is technically under contract for next season, but the Saints and him agreed to a reworked deal where if he plays 4 games next year, they'd pay him a $31.775 million roster bonus. And if he's on the roster the 3rd day of this league year, so March 17th, they would owe him a fully guaranteed $32 million roster bonus for 2024. So there's like $65 million in money that kicks in the first week or, a month into the season. So look, that's why he is on our free agent rankings. They can assign another new contract. And I won't get into the weeds of, all the whatever, but my guess is he's going to be placed as a June 1 designated cut on the first day of this league year. And so that's why he's on there. And I think, look, Juju Smith-Schuster signs a 1-year deal for $3.7 million, right in that range, ends up making 10.2 mil, earns 6.5 in incentives this year. And $2 million of that was for the playing in the conference championship and playing in the Super Bowl. If you want to sign a 1-year flyer to get your career back on track and you are a wide receiver, there is literally one option where you can take incentives tied to playoffs and take incentives tied to yada, yada, yada. And it's not dumb. And it is the Kansas City Chiefs. So I love that possibility. And I can just picture now, the slant god himself with like 100 catches next year and people going, why did the league let Michael Thomas go to the Chiefs? I can see it already.
That one, it was interesting. When we talked about Keenan Allen at the top, I immediately thought Keenan Allen, if he is someone that is a cap casualty, is the type of guy who will, I think, take a discount. It's like Richard Sherman. Remember when when the Seahawks wouldn't pay him, he's like, all right, well, then I'm going to the Niners and I'm going to take a deal, right? It's such a similar thing. I would see him like going, okay, I'm going to the Raiders, I'm going to the Chiefs. Like that. I mean, he would eat in that offense. Sorry, Arjun. I know that's a tough.
No, it's all good. All good.
Okay, let's talk a little draft here. So the way that I prepared for this segment was I did 25 mock draft sims on pff.com, drafting for all top 10 teams. And I had a couple of trends that I noticed myself doing a couple of times. And that's how I'm going to make my prediction for the player and which team I think they will go to in the top 10. But to set the table here, let me just go give everyone some of the odds that are out there. So the number one overall pick, I think these have been pretty consistent. Bryce Young is -150. CJ Stroud is 3-1. Jalen Carter is +650. Will Anderson +750. Will Levis also +750. Anthony Richardson is 40-1. The first quarterback drafted, these are on FanDuel. Bryce Young -210. CJ Stroud +210. Bryce Young -200. CJ Stroud +210. Will Levis 7-1. First wide receiver drafted, we talked about this a few weeks ago. Quentin Johnson, 6'4", from TCU. Everyone else is generally pretty small. He's +160. Jordan Addison +230. Jackson Smith-Njigba 3-1. Jalen Hyatt from Tennessee +430. Zay Flowers 23-1. Not a lot of draft props out there. As we talked about, sports books get killed by these. The people that bet them generally know. If you want to be in the know, by the way, you should join the Printing Press Discord. We will definitely be dropping anything that we hear in there. So with that said, let's start with you here, Brad. What is a top 10 pick, player, and team connection that you like?
My favorite one right now is the Detroit Lions, who have both pick 6 and 18 in this draft. And I know people are, going quarterback. I think they're going to stick with Goff for one more year. Not assessing whether that's a smart decision or not, but cornerback Devin Witherspoon out of Illinois, I think is a slam dunk pick for them at 6th overall. He is our highest graded corner. You watch him. Look, I love Christian Gonzalez at Oregon, but he doesn't really tackle. Devin Witherspoon wants to take your head off every single snap. And I think Aaron Glenn, the defensive coordinator of Detroit, needs a guy like him to come in, play opposite Jeffrey Okudah, fix that defense, and maybe get him a head coaching job, the following offseason. So I love that pick for Detroit.
That's so funny because that was one of I had a few options. I figured we might have some overlap. And that was one that I just kept mocking every single time. Like the first draft I did, I was sitting there at pick 6 going, all right, well, like they should try and run it back with Goff. And you're looking at Gonzalez or Witherspoon. So love that one. And as we get closer, by the way, these are things that we will be able to start to bet on, right? So you'll be able to get kind of over-unders for pick number for these players. There also are team to draft this player odds that come out as well. So these are things that you can bet on. Arjun, what about you?
Yeah, so one that I think has gained a little bit of steam, but I kind of really like it. It's Tyree Wilson, who's the edge rusher from Texas Tech to go to the Seattle Seahawks. I think the Seattle Seahawks, like their D-line is okay. I think they could really use a top guy at the top of the draft. They have a Uchenna Nwosu, who's, a pretty solid edge rusher. He's, a starting guy, but he's not a true edge one. Their interior could use some work, but I really think getting an edge rusher to play, it's really outside linebacker, but I think they differentiate between 4-3 and 3-4 a lot in that defense. And I think, he is a pretty long wingspan. I think that's something that Seattle covets. That's something that like Uchenna Nwosu has. He's, a little bit lighter on his feet, but again, that's something that I think Seattle does like, and something that why they signed Uchenna Nwosu in free agency. And I think overall, just the Seahawks really need to improve their pass rush, especially since they did a good job kind of improving the offensive line on the line on the offensive side of the ball and their secondary. And I think they're the last part to building a complete roster is to get another edge rusher. So I think since Will Anderson will likely be off the board, the next best edge rusher per the PFF big board is Tyree Wilson. And I think the Seahawks are a good landing spot for him.
Yeah, Tyree Wilson is a guy that I've heard a lot from kind of the people that just watch a ton of film, who's just continually shot up boards. And so I think that's a really good call. He's one of those guys where I'd be interested when the over-unders come out. Who was a guy that was similar to this? Jalen Phillips. That was a guy that I think Eric and I had a ridiculous position on by the time it got there. And one of the ways that we sort of found that, and we'll talk to Evan Silva at some point here. Evan does a tremendous amount of great work, kind of just tracking in the know people. And he was the guy's like, everyone loves this guy. And I want to say his pick over under was like 34.5 and went like 17 or something like that. So good opportunity here. I have a question for you guys before I divulge mine. Where do you guys think Anthony Richardson goes?
I'll jump first. I legitimately think he's going to be a top 15 pick.
You think so?
I don't know if it's via trade up or what, but you talk about taking a toolsy quarterback and all those things. His tools are ridiculous. And also, this is obviously anecdotal, but as a Vanderbilt fan, built program on the rise. You watch Will Levis and Anthony Richardson play the same team. Richardson objectively looked much better to me, so it made me go back and watch his tape. There are a lot of kind of head scratchers. He had a pick six in a big game against I forget who, and he came back. The rest of the game was rattled, but his arm is ridiculous. So I think he's going to go top 20, top 15.
Okay, because one of the things that I kept mocking, and I was surprised by this, was Anthony Richardson to the Panthers. And one of the reasons that now, look, I thought Frank Reich last year was a tier 1 NFL head coach. So, I have a lot of belief. This is a different move, certainly for him, right? But it's interesting because obviously the Panthers with Cam Newton, and you bring in a guy like Anthony Richardson, who is a physical freak, similar to the way that Cam Newton was. He can run the ball, he can throw it. And I think people will kind of shy away from that because Frank Reich has had 40-year-old white guys that couldn't move as his quarterbacks. So, this feels super different, but to me is a cool fit. Here's the thing I'm most confident about in the top 10 guys. It's that the Philadelphia Eagles are going to trade down. The thing I am most confident about is that the Eagles at 10 are not making that pick. Okay. A lot of the time that I was doing these drafts, I was getting to 10 people that were still on the board, like Quentin Johnston was a guy that was on the board pretty consistently at pick number 10. I could see a team that is in need of a tall wide receiver going, look, if we don't get him, we're not getting a tall wide receiver. These other guys are short. See them jumping up. But I just don't think that the Eagles are going to trade down here. But here's the one that I like most. It's the Arizona Cardinals drafting Will Anderson Jr. at number 3. And I think this is a guy that we haven't talked about. He was number 1 on so many big boards for such a long time, ridiculously good pass rusher. You look at where the Cardinals are at there at pick number 3. They're obviously not taking a quarterback. Jalen Carter seems to be a unique fit for the Bears. I don't think he's the greatest fit for every team. The Cardinals just lost JJ Watt. They lost Chandler Jones. They have no pass rush. They have no defense. And so Will Anderson Jr. feels like a great kind of fit there. And who did they just pick up as head coach? Jonathan Gannon, a guy that has had some real talent out there with the Eagles, obviously at edge. One of those guys was Hassan Reddick, ironically, coming from the Cardinals. So I really like Will Anderson Jr. there at pick 3. And I think the way that I'm looking to potentially capitalize on this is seeing where his pick number comes out. Will people kind of forget about him? Will it maybe come at, 4.5 or something like that? And opportunity to jump down. What do you guys think about that?
4.5, like you said, if that spread comes out, I would take the under in a heartbeat.
So it probably won't be 4.5.
I guess not. What do you think, Arjun?
Yeah, I'm on board with it. I do think there should be some discussion if it's Carter and Anderson on the board, just because the Cardinals, I think, will have a need at I guess it's D tackle when the draft comes around. I at least when I was doing my predictions for our article, I was projecting Zach Allen, who is the Cardinals a 3-4 DN, so he's lining up in the B gaps or B plus gap or whatever it's called, and I'm projecting him to leave Arizona. So they're going to have a need for an interior pass rusher. And, I think Jalen Carter could fill that Javon Hargrave role that Javon Hargrave held in Philadelphia, where he's not lining up as a nose because they have Lakey Fotu to kind of fill that role, but he is lining up as that Javon Hargrave or Fletcher Cox type player. So I do think that warrants a discussion. The Cardinals also have Marcus Golden, Myjai Sanders, Dennis Gardick, Cameron Thomas, all under contract for next year. So they have some edge depth where I don't think it's a lock that they could go Anderson, but I do think that the Cardinals would favor edge rushers a little bit higher than D tackles. And I think, that it could be a discussion, but I do lean with you that Anderson would probably be the pick if both of them are on the board.
That's a great point. I was going to jump in after George. Bama played Will Anderson at 4-eye a bunch. They put him on the inside. And like you said, Zach Allen playing kind of like a 5 tech and Yeah, I don't know. That's just kind of a thought, but I hear what you're saying for sure. I just feel like Gannon's going to want just like that blue chip, just like, pure edge rushing pass rusher, but I think they could go either way.
Yeah, it's interesting. Javon Hargrave, also a free agent.
Yeah.
It would be very interesting. I don't think you look at the Cardinals are going to, whether they look at the odds or not, probably realize pretty quickly, hey, our team sucks. They have, the longest odds to win the Super Bowl this year. And yet, unlike the Texans, have a quarterback who they should be competitive with. And so I do think they go out and they spend some money here and, try to kind of put together a competitive team. And I think that means I could see them winning free agency this year, if that makes sense, which is a good reason to fade a team. Any of these props that stick out to you guys? We've talked about these a few times, but obviously things change in terms of what we're hearing. Arjun, Brad, anything that sticks out to you?
I know we joke about it a lot, but I do think like Zay Flowers at 23-1 does deserve some consideration. He's 23-1 on FanDuel. He's 15-1 on DraftKings. So there is a little bit of a price discrepancy there. And it just sounds like a lot of people do like Zay Flowers as a receiver. He got a lot of hype during the season. And I've seen, a lot of draft people kind of say like they really like him as a player. I mean, he is a little bit on the smaller side, so that could obviously scare people off. He didn't participate in the Shrine or Senior Bowl. He had like one practice in the Shrine Bowl, but that's it. And that might raise some concerns, but I think overall he really boosted his stock. I know it wasn't against the greatest competition, but a lot of people really seem to like him. And I think the price should be probably closer to like 10-1. And I think could keep rising as the draft season goes on.
We've talked about a bunch of these. There's more that needs to come out. Obviously, the markets are very thin so far. We touched on this, I believe, a little bit, but if you start to, I think you wait for this one, maybe wait for the over-under as well. But there is a scenario when you go through mock drafts, like George mentioned, you go through the MDS and you kind of play through things in your mind. If the Colts don't feel they need to jump the Texans for a quarterback, the Bears are kind of in a really tough spot where trying to trade down is going to be a challenge for them because that Arizona, I think Arizona wants to take Carter or Anderson, but like you said, I think they're one of the worst rosters in the NFL. I don't think Kyler Murray is going to play next year. And I think we see from them with a new defensive head coach, hey, maybe we trade down and take 10 defensive players like Carolina did a couple of years ago and just try to fix that side of the ball before Kyler comes back. And so long answer short, Jalen Carter at 650-1 or plus 650, 6.5-1 to go first overall. You're basically just betting on a trade not happening. Like I said, maybe better ways to play it, but I think it's the best value right now for the number one overall pick.
I agree. That was the one I was going to call out. You think about the way, when you think about it in terms of a trade, as you just outlined there, and you go through the machinations for how that happens, it all of a sudden becomes a little bit harder to kind of construct. And you then look at the first quarterback drafted props. And I think here is where you start to look at it and you go, okay, Bryce Young is minus 200. That's not quite locks. That's not a lock. And what I think it speaks to is just maybe a little bit of lukewarmness towards this draft class, right? And a team looking at this going, am I really going to trade up to draft a guy that the league isn't, all clamoring for? That ultimately I think is going to be the way that teams think about it. So I like it too. And I want it just for the chaos that it would then kind of create. It'd be fun to talk about.
I do wonder also just on real quick on the Bryce Young thing. Jim Irsay coming out and talking about the kid at Alabama and saying how good he is. Jim Irsay is not like, I don't know. I think that was him trying to play a mind game, trying to be yeah. And it's like, he's just too transparent. So anyway.
Yeah. People thought that Jim Irsay was being an idiot. He was being an idiot because he was trying to be slick and clearly not being slick. He's just smart enough to try to be slick.
Yes. Yeah, exactly right.
Brad, I do have a question about Carter. I'm kind of with you that I think he's probably the best player on the board if the Bears don't trade back and stick with Fields and take a non-quarterback at one. But seeing that this is like probably the strongest interior defensive line class we've seen in a while, Deron Payne, Hargrave, Dalvin Tomlinson, Draymond Jones, Zach Allen, just to name a few, we can probably assume that the Bears are going to go out and get one of these guys. They have a ton of money. They're going to probably spend for a top of the line guy, whether it is Deron Payne or Javon Hargrave. If they do make that move, do you think that takes Carter off the board? Because they also have Justin Jones, who they signed to like a mid-tier deal last year. So do you think if they go after a top of the line guy in the interior D line, does that take Carter off the board?
So it's a great question. And I do think we should now pencil it in like a post first couple days of free agency, like revisiting draft props really quickly. On that point, though, I think Justin Jones was 115th out of 120 interior defenders for our grading. And I think the player opposite him on our starting lineup was like 119th out of 120. So they already went ahead and cut Al-Qadim Muhammad, their edge defender, who also was probably in the triple digits. I don't think it's going to, but hey, look, if they get Payne, he is kind of similar to Carter, where he's, kind of a one tech nose, but can play some three tech, has played a little bit more the last couple of years. Like they're very similar players, but the reason why I love that one, you should look at coaches, the head coach, first of all. Yes, we fall in love with GMs. Head coaches are influencing picks a ton. And then secondly, the Bears have literally said over and over again, the most important position on this defense is three tech on the interior. Like they've just been very transparent about that. So, but it's a great question. If they sign Payne, maybe there's value on a Will Anderson bet.
A couple of things here. That's where I was going, is the Will Anderson bet. He's 750 to 1 right now to be first overall. It's interesting. And this is one of the things that you get in the PFF NFL draft guide, which is a great resource, and you can see where players line up, which is really awesome. That's not something you're going to find out there. And by the way, it's just the first iteration of this. You get we re-up and adjust as we get combine information, as we learn more about these players. So not only are you getting a great deal now when you get the NFL draft guide, but there's a lot more to come throughout draft season. We're going to add more data, more analysis, obviously all the measurable stuff. But it is really interesting. I mean, you think about Eberflus, yes. And in Indy, they traded for DeForest Buckner, right? They valued him at a top, was it 13th
overall pick for your guy, Javon
and Ryan Pace. Yeah. And Ryan Pace, I mean, comes from Kansas City, where they had Chris Jones. So like they're going to value the interior. That would just be something, guys, like I would just be ready the second if they were to, if they go sign Deron Payne. My first thing to do would be to go bet Will Anderson.
I think it's a good point. Yeah, no, it's a good call, Arjun, George. I agree. They need help there too.
That's smart. All right, let's talk a little, it's off season. So we're all degenerate gamblers to a certain extent. I consider myself like at least somewhat decent when it comes to NFL, because we work in the space and like we study the crap out of it. I am definitely nowhere near that in terms of my NFL offseason betting, but that ain't going to stop me. So we're going to talk a little bit about what we bet in the offseason. You guys are both new to the podcast in terms of the offseason. So quick reminder, you're about to get a lot of F1 talk from me over the course of the next few months. So I won't do it here. That is one of the things that I do bet. And I'll talk about the people that I follow, who there's a lot of great publicly available analysis on this. It's not like I just go out there with only vibes. There are certainly vibes involved, but you can bet. What I look for, and I'm interested in your guys' opinion here, when I'm not super sharp on something, I look for people that are, and I use that information, right? So F1 is one of those things where there's a ton of publicly available information. There's a lot of people who are doing stuff with it. And so you can actually make some pretty sound bets in that space. Let me start with you, Arjun. Your NFL offseason betting portfolio, what does it look like?
Yeah, so I'm sure division futures will come out soon within the next couple of weeks, right? I think like Brad talked about on the last podcast, like getting ahead of those betting teams that have a lot of offseason resources is usually a smart bet. So we'll probably place a couple of division futures before free agency opens. But when it comes to like the actual offseason, it's mainly I bet NBA like almost every day. put in some research there every day. Eric and Ben Brown got me into WNBA betting. That was what I was doing the whole summer when I was in California, because I hate baseball, so I don't really bet on baseball at all. So I was betting WNBA, have a model for that. So that's, part of the portfolio. And then I didn't really get into F1. I kind of want to. And I do follow Sam Hoppin, and I think, I'll look at his simulations and stuff. Also text you a couple times, George, but definitely want to add that to my portfolio. But outside of football is really just basketball for me, because that's, I guess, the sport I know best outside of football.
Sam Hoppin is a great follow. He runs a simulation for F1. Usually, he was one of the people I was going to shout out. One of the things that I do is I check before I place my bets. Actually, I kind of write them down, go through my own. So I sort of guess the lines like we do on this show, and then do some research. And I always look at his simulations. And, oh, okay, I liked Lewis here, and he liked him as well. Real quick, Arjun, your NBA betting, what sorts of do you have a model for that? Are there different models that you look at that we can check out?
Yeah, I mean, I have my own model that I use to bet totals. I don't place a ton of totals because my model's a little bit new. I didn't really have a lot of time to back test and rework it, but it's been doing okay in terms of totals. I do bet a lot of player props. That's something that I research a lot. I have some people that I follow that post some stuff that I'll use. If people are interested, I have a BetStamp account. It's Arjun Menon 10, so you can follow me there. I've been a little bit riding hot, so I think I will take a little bit of a break after All-Star break, just because of players going to Mexico after the All-Star game, and maybe not being in the right frame of mind. But yeah, it's mostly player props, some totals here and there, and then and then WNBA once the NBA season is over.
We need some true heat check bets from you, Arjun. That's what we're looking for. To jump in. So maybe all agree on baseball. I think it's impossible to bet. I know people say it's can be the easiest to bet if you have a strong model. I don't know those people are, but I've never had similar experience. I'm a huge golf bettor, and I honestly think the tournaments, not the majors, there is still so much value there and opportunity there. In particular, I do like placing a couple. I'll bet if you look at the full board of futures to win the entire tournament, I'll take a couple in different tiers, kind of like a Calcutta, but a couple long shots, couple shorter odds players. And I think an underrated too is you can bet after each day, and the odds don't shorten as much as you'd think. Based on a player's form, how they're looking, how they're playing on the course, all those things. And if you have a couple good early bets, you can hedge, and it kind of because of the nature of the odds, it works out fairly well. But the big thing with the head-to-heads and other bets is you can just find out how players play on certain courses. Does the course call for good driving off the tee, distance-wise, accuracy-wise? The Players' Championship is the next big tournament, the fifth major. It is not a course that requires you to drive long. You need to be accurate off the tee and hit the fairway. Things like that, you can just dive into that. You can find so much golf data, and I just don't think the markets are very sharp in a lot of different areas. And then also form, kind of like soccer. They talk about form and how the players are playing. All those things matter. To a degree, how's the guy looking? And also, if you do watch golf at all, you can see some tendencies, some torques. I'm not betting Jordan Spieth at any point in the near future. The guy looks rattled right now on the course. There's just a lot of things you can pick up along the way. But I would say go to a tournament, look at the layout of the course. What is the distance? Is it more of a cutter's course, a guy who plays left to right? Is it more of a guy who hits big draws? All these things. Is it, does green to tee matter? Does fairway, approach shots matter? Yada, yada, yada. And it's just, I think it's just still kind of an untapped market again in the non-majors. In the majors, I think the markets are fairly sharp. But if you dig into the other tournaments around it, I think you can find a lot of value.
A couple of things on that. There is a lot of golf data that's publicly available, which you can go check out. I think it's Data Golf.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And you can look up simple things like strokes gained on different components of players' games. And the thing that I use with that is there's some research that has been done, and I'm blanking. I had it at the tip of my tongue. I'm blanking who I read this from. But different parts are more stable than others. So putting is notoriously unstable. You think about putting as the play under pressure, like Nick Foles just winging it out to Alshon Jeffrey as he gets speared in the chest. That kind of putting is just you get hot. Now, certainly guys can get the yips, but the parts of the game that are a lot more stable are things like the tee to green approach, driving, I think driving is the most stable. The tough thing with driving is, as you just mentioned, on certain courses it matters, and on certain courses it doesn't. So you look at something like Augusta is a good example where, like, Tiger was able to just kind of bomb it out there, and there were a couple of holes in that one that he won a few years ago where he missed, wide right. I want to say it was it 12, and was able to hit, still had an approach to the green. Those kinds of things matter, and you can still get an iron on the ball and get it up there. I'm just looking at some Masters, by the way. Tiger is 36-1 to win the Masters. That is insane. Just taking a look here at some of the guys. So Brooks is 36-1 as well. Cam Young is 32-1. I like Cam Young quite a bit. I need to do a little more research on this, but he strikes me as a player. He hits the crap out of the ball. Just like tattoos that thing.
Now I got a shout out. I hung out with his cousin today. We're big
really?
Cam Young people. Yeah, I know
Okay.
Cam Young's family. So this is a Cam Young podcast.
By the way, he has an MLB logo like on his hat.
Yes, he's sponsored by the MLB.
This is like betting on baseball.
There you go.
That
That
counts. Bet on baseball, but actually bet on baseball. Bet on Cam Young. So I think I'll probably put that down. I like that at 32-1. I talked about the Max Homa US Open bet again. Now he lost today, kind of crumbled towards the end of the day. John Rahm, who is right now the favorite, tied with Rory to win the Masters, ended up winning. So that probably protects that Max Homa opportunity. He has the 3 lowest scores at LA Country Club, which is where the US Open is being played. So I like that one quite a bit. Arjun, NBA futures. It is the All-Star game today, so it's kind of the midway point. Are there any futures that you like, or are you sticking just to game?
Yeah, no, I have gotten some NBA futures down as like this season has gone on. I do kind of like the Denver Nuggets, just finals outrighter to win the Western Conference. I am a huge like Jokic fan. I think he should be the MVP again this year. I think part of my kind of like handicap there is their starting lineup is one of the best in the NBA. So with him, it's Aaron Gordon, Michael Porter Jr., Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, and then Jamal Murray. That group has played about 416 minutes together. And in those minutes, they have a positive or a plus 16.1 net rating, which is extremely high. It's like one of the highest for any starting lineup in the NBA. And as experienced NBA bettors would know, when it comes to the playoffs, it's about your stars, not your depth. So while the Nuggets in years past have had great depth, this is the year where I think their starting lineup is one of the best. And I think, once they get to the playoffs, having home court advantage, the number 1 seed, will be huge. And I think what we've seen in years past is home court advantage has gotten bigger in the NBA in the playoffs. So I think that being able to maintain control of the 1 seed throughout the West will give them a lot of advantages. And I think they are versatile enough to guard the Suns. They've always given trouble to the Warriors when they've played them in the regular season and the playoffs. Or I don't think they've met in the playoffs, but in the regular season, they've always given them trouble. So I think they have the versatility and the star power in their starting lineup, as evidenced by their net rating, to really make a run if everything goes right and they stay healthy until the playoffs.
They're plus 750 on FanDuel right now. Celtics plus 280, Bucks plus 430. The Phoenix Suns, my Phoenix Suns, as I have them as a part of my one of my big championship parlays, are plus 480, and the Denver Nuggets are plus 750. Then it goes the Clippers 12-1 and the Sixers 14-1. How overly juiced are the Suns odds in your opinion, Arjun?
It's tough. I think it's probably a little bit too high, but I think the Suns the past couple of games have really shown their depth. I mean, Josh Okogie was dropped like 23, 24 points against the Clippers, who have one of the best like wing defenses in the league. I think like having that depth at the guard / forward position is huge. They have guys who've been in playoff runs like Damian Lee, who isn't that great of a player, but he can hit some shots when needed. Mm-hmm. But ultimately, again, it just comes down to the stars, and having Booker and Durant being able to create shots for their own is going to be big when it comes to the playoffs. And I think they should be able to score at will against any team. Their depth obviously is still an issue, but outside of a couple of guys, but I think their stars are compare very well against any other West team.
The tricky thing for them is that they have 2 stars in Durant and Chris Paul, who it's like they could just go down at any moment. I mean, you're sitting there, you're up 3-0 in a series, they run into each other on the way back to the bench, and they're both out. Jokic, by the way, is like minus 240 to win the MVP, which is crazy because like Jordan and LeBron never got 3 straight. Mm-hmm. Voters like hate doing that, so it'd be interesting. Are there any dark horses there? I was looking at some of these odds. Where are they here? So MVP Jokic minus 240, Embiid 6-1, Giannis 7-1, Tatum 18-1, Luka 21-1. What if Luka went on some? So they have Kyrie now. Take a little bit of the kind of offensive or defense focus away from him. If he just goes off rest of the season, do you think he could get it?
He's one. Jump in, Phil Arjun. I also like Tatum. Just if the like you said, it's a narrative bet where they want to avoid giving a guy 3 years in a row. And if the Celtics win like 65 games, they might just like, hey, it's because the team was so good and they're just so good in the conference, like one of those type of things.
One long shot I kind of like, if I was to put a long shot, the New Orleans Pelicans 55-1 to win the finals. Look, it all comes down to if they can stay healthy, which they just can't. They started off so well. I think they were like 23-10 at some point in the season. And then Ingram goes down, Zion goes down. McCollum is really having to carry the load at 8, or he's like over 30 years old. So that's a little bit tough for him. But if they all get healthy, I think they have the star power and the scoring to make a run in the playoffs. Herbert Jones, one of the best defenders in the NBA, can match up well against Durant or LeBron or Luka, whatever star he has to go up against. So the Pelicans would be a dark horse team if they can get everyone healthy, but Zion already being his injury, getting re-injured and having to sit out more weeks past the All-Star break, that's why their odds are 55-1 and not shorter than that.
Dude, I'm so glad you said that, because if George kicked it to me, that was going to be my answer for the finals one. They're actually 60-1 on DraftKings too. I don't hate 25-1 to win the West. You mentioned everything you said. Jose Alvarado is also a great perimeter defender, so they can lock down guards, like you said. With Herb Jones, you can lock down a front court guy that is a dominant scorer. They got to get healthy, big if, but they're deep as well. Dude, like you said, BI and Zion hadn't really even played together, and they were first in the Western Conference.
Yeah.
I like that one. And then just for the Eastern side, the Cavs 11-1 to win the East, so is a little bit intriguing as well. It's not really a long shot, but longer odds than the Sixers, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me.
Yeah, the Pelicans winning the NBA championship would just be so funny. Like the fact that they gave up Anthony Davis, everyone's like, oh man, you know what? Shipping a star out, and then the Lakers struggling to do anything, even make the playoffs, and the Pelicans end up winning. It'd be amazing. I think the draft is about to happen, which means we're gonna wrap this up. But let's get out of here on this. The XFL is happening. There are certain sickos here that will bet on it. Arjun, you are one of those sickos. So what is your takeaway from most of the XFL week 1 happening already?
Yeah. I caught a little bit of the Houston Roughnecks game last night.
Awesome.
Just a little bit, but I mean, Wade Phillips being their defensive coordinator, I think gives them a huge advantage, having an NFL defensive coordinator who's called plays at the NFL level for a while, having that experience, having that knowledge of knowing how to take advantage of bad offensive lines and bad quarterbacks. I mean, they will be a house, I think. And I think like their defense is going to be one of the best in the XFL. I think the first touchdown that they let up should have actually been an interception, but Carl Cheffers somehow called it a touchdown. So I think the Houston Roughnecks will be in for a good XFL, and I think they will probably be a team I find myself betting on throughout the season.
Yep. So we were chatting pre-show about, I think to a degree, we always think of quarterbacks being why these leagues can't be sustained. But I also think offensive line play or the lack thereof is a big part of it. There's 5. It's just 1 week, yes. But of the 5 highest graded offensive linemen, 3 are Houston Roughnecks and 2 are St. Louis Battlehawks, who couldn't do anything on offense today until their miraculous comeback win. But I think if you're getting good pass protection, I think A.J. McCarron is probably one of the better quarterbacks in this crop. And of course, PFF legend Bruce Bradkowski making the calls on offense. Those are the 2 teams that I like. If they can keep that up, keeping their quarterback on his feet and then making plays behind him.
Best way to bet the XFL is not to bet it. But if you do bet it, just don't watch the games. That's the only thing. Go enjoy your life. That was it for our show. We'll be back on Wednesday. Thanks for hanging out. Go join the PFF Printing Press Discord. Love y'all. Peace.